Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, welcome to the end of month Q&A for October 2021. We are definitely out of YouTube's summer lull now, so views are up, your comments have been coming in thick and fast. So I've had to be a little more selective this month when choosing comments, because if I responded to everything I wanted to respond to, this video would be about 4 hours long. So I've had to chop it down a little bit, but there's still plenty of your thoughts to get through today. So let's see who is first up. Accidentally me, myself and I. Okay? I don't see how shimming will get rid of the choking out on the higher frets besides just raising the string action, and that's done with the saddle screws. You change the neck angle only. If the action of the saddle screws are on its limits, or you want the strings closer or further away from the body. Otherwise, the proper solution is to dress the upper frets with a fall off, from the 13th to the very last fret at a slight angle lower in comparison to the rest of the frets. Now, this was a video shimming the neck of this telly here because I had a real problem with it choking out on the upper frets. Now, yes, you can just raise the action of the guitar to bring the strings further away from those upper frets and solve the buzzing. But in order to do that on this guitar and stop that buzzing, honestly, the action was unplayably high. It was about that far off the fretboard. So that wasn't an option. Now, yes, you can dress the frets, and if you're doing a full refret, a luthier can shave some of the wood away to get rid of the lump around the neck pocket. That creates more fall away and stops the buzzing. But that's very expensive, very invasive to your guitar, and also you can't do it yourself at home, most people anyway. So yes, it is an option, that probably is the correct solution, but for a bolt-on neck, a shim essentially does a very similar thing, because the problem when strings are choking out just on the upper frets but not lower down is basically that the nut end of the neck is too low relative to the neck pocket. It's kind of at that sort of angle, if that makes any sense on the camera. So it creates that lump around the neck pocket. Now, by angling the neck up, you create a flatter surface, and it doesn't have as much of a relative lump over the neck pocket as it did when the neck was too low. So that's what a shim does. Now, if you were shimming the neck with a perfectly flat piece of material, yes, you would just sort of bulk out the neck pocket, it would raise it up, and you'd have to raise the action even further to compensate. That wouldn't work. But with a neck shim, especially the Scumback shim that's in here now, is angled like a piece of cheese. So if you have the bottom of your neck pocket, that's perfectly flat, so there's a good contact patch, and is much better for tone, as we found in that video. But the top edge is kind of angled up like that. So it keeps the neck pocket end of the neck at pretty much the same level, but because of that angle in the material, it raises the nut end up. So it basically creates a smoother line from nut to the bridge. It sort of compensates for the fact that there is a lump around the neck pocket causing that choking. So that's what a shim does. It changes the neck angle. So you're right, you could raise the saddle screws, that would solve the problem if it's a minor problem. You could dress the frets and create a fall away, that's expensive and invasive. But for a bolt-on neck, a shim basically does a similar thing, just kind of targeting the other end and bringing it up rather than bringing this down. The effect is pretty much the same. So that's how a shim works, is changing the neck angle, as you say, but that does, relative to the neck pocket, create a flatter line from nut to bridge. Ogamilto70, surprised you didn't even fool with the level knob. Now this was the Hageman metal pedal here. I'm not a metal player, but this pedal sounds phenomenal. Now there's two reasons why when I'm demoing a gain pedal, for example, that I keep the level pretty much set at unity throughout the video. One is for reasons of how I represent the pedal, but the other is a much more practical reason. So if you're using a pedal to push the signal harder and harder into the front end of an amplifier, what will essentially happen is you'll start to hear less of the fundamental sound of the pedal and more of your preamp tubes breaking up. So it tends to shift the balance from the sound of the pedal to the sound of the amp overdriving, because you're slamming it harder in and the amp's doing more of the heavy lifting in terms of creating the gain, which is fine. How a pedal interacts with an amplifier is important, but when you're listening to the real core sound of a pedal, you don't want to be hearing the amp doing too much. It's why people complain when you say, this is my clean tone at the start of a video, and it's a really dirty amp, because what you're putting into the amp then is it hides the sort of similarities and differences. If you're doing a pedal comparison, for example, you hear more of the amp and less of the pedals. So that's one reason why I generally keep things set at unity. But the other is something that people watching gear demos might not necessarily I think of straight away. But for someone who puts them together, it is an important consideration, which is the overall volume of a video. So, for example, let's say the Hageman has, I don't know, 20 dB of level boost. I'm making that up. It's probably something around there. If at the end of a video I slam it into an amp and it gets, say, 15, 20 dB louder in terms of the audio, there's only so loud you can have digital audio. It has to sort of peak at just below 0, otherwise it will clip and sound horrible. So if I set the guitar level so that the end of the video, when it's pushed by 20 dB, is just right at the top of what it can take, the beginning of the video will be super quiet. So I'll do the voiceover, you guys will set the volume of your device accordingly, and then the guitar will come in and it'll be really, really quiet until the end when I slam the levels. Now you can adjust that in Pro Tools, but at that point it gets a little bit convoluted when putting a demo together. I want you to hear just the sound of the pedal in the room into my amp. I don't want to be tweaking things in Pro Tools to compensate and having to tell you what I'm doing and trying to explain to people why I'm doing it. It just gets a little bit much. So that's why I generally keep things set at pretty much unity throughout a gear demo. Yes, you can use something like the Hageman Metal to slam into an amp and overdrive the amp, but that wasn't really what the pedal demo was all about. So that's why I generally do it. You know, you can absolutely do it, but it is a bit of a headache when you're trying to balance audio in Pro Tools to create a consistent sounding video for you guys. Sean Ida Miller. It's an outstanding all-round speaker that pairs exceptionally well with just about any amp that I've paired it with, British and American circuits alike. Personally, I rate it favourably in comparison to the Celestion Alnico offerings. It's woody, chimey and sounds perfectly EQ'd to me. Now this was the Scumback S75-PVC, and I'm really enjoying that speaker. It has a fantastic sound. And I would agree that every amp I've kind of put into that speaker just sounds phenomenal through it. But it was interesting looking at the comments underneath that demo that some people absolutely loved the speaker, and I'm certainly one of them. Other people really didn't, and it was a real Marmite speaker. Some people just didn't react favourably to it at all. James Kavanagh, for example, Joe, I thought that one sounded very poor indeed, no cut whatsoever and muffled. And this just goes to show that everybody's tastes are completely different. Whilst I thought that speaker sounded fantastic, it's not for everybody, which just fuels the whole gear debate of which is the best guitar, amp, speaker, pedal, whatever. Everybody has a different take and different preferences. So there is no one product that everybody will be happy with. I think that's what I learned from that video, but I still stand by the fact that I love how that Scumback speaker sounds, even though some people really didn't, and that's absolutely fine. Ghostface Griller. All the best guitars find you, you don't find them. And that was the video of my Strat telling the story of that. And I absolutely agree. It does seem to happen, doesn't it, that really special guitars could have come onto your radar almost by accident, and they do kind of find you. The same happened with my Heritage 535. It just so happened that that was being sold for a really good price by a chap not too far from me, down in the depths of Somerset, but because he was so far away from like London and everywhere else, and it was collection only, it seemed nobody really wanted to travel all the way down to the bottom of Somerset to pick it up. But for me it was really convenient, and that is probably one of my favourite guitars I own, probably one of the best sounding. I absolutely love it, and I got it for a fantastic price. So I would agree, the best guitars do seem to find you. Things have a weird way of working out like that. Roin Rove, I think. I probably butchered that pronunciation, sorry. Please never let that guitar go, again on the Strat. And yeah, I don't intend on letting it go. It's a fantastic guitar, and especially as it's not a real Fender, it's a parts caster, it's worth a lot less money to anybody else but me. So it wouldn't be worth my while selling it, considering what I've put into it to make it sound as good as it does. So yeah, it's a lifer for me, I think, that guitar. Andreas F. For me, the JTM 45 was the best sounding of the two when using humbuckers, while with the Strat, the Retro 50 had more punch and feel. Both sounded great with every combo nonetheless. Now this was the biggest video of the month. This was comparing the orange picks only circuit with the earliest JTM 45 circuit, and putting them side by side with the correct speakers for those amps and what they're most synonymous with. And yeah, a lot of people watched that video and everybody seemed to really like it. And I think I would agree with your summary, Andreas, that for me, the JTM45 I prefer with humbuckers. I'm not going to say it sounds best, but I prefer it with humbuckers. And the sort of thicker, lower mid-range of the Orange does seem to work really well with single coils, the Strat especially. So it's a little bit like what people would use a tube screamer for, to fatten out that lower mid-range. The Orange does that on its own. It can get a little bit too thick and lower midi with sort of thick-sounding thin-line guitars, for example, but with single coils, you would struggle to beat that for just an amazing Strat into an amp turned up tone. The Marshall does get a little bit kind of fizzy in the upper mid-range with the Strat in a way that the Orange just sounds fat and huge. So I think that's pretty much a very good summary of what I was hearing in that video. Yours truly. I love them both. As soon as I thought I liked one better than the other, I thought the opposite the next tone change or volume change. JTM45 is a little more classic and what I'm used to, but the Orange has different mids for some very British tones. Orange has almost a mix of Vox and Marshall. That is a very nice sounding JTM45. KT66 is in that. Who built it? Thank you, very nice video. Yes, that amp was running KT66s. It's branded as a Vajra amp. I did make a video all about it, which I'll link to up there now, whichever side it is. It was built by a chap called Mark Durham over in the States, who was one of the sort of leading lights on the, I think it was the 18-watt form, all about sort of building Marshall clones. Sadly, he passed away just after building that amp and gifting it to somebody in the UK who I bought it off. But yeah, it is just an absolute top quality. When I took it to be serviced and fitted with the KT66s, because the previous owner had it running on 6L6s when I bought it, I wanted KT66s. He sort of looked through it and said, this is matchless quality in terms of the components and the wiring. It is just absolutely pristine. But because it's not a Marshall or a known boutique brand, it was way, way less money. So I'm absolutely delighted that I got that amp for the price I did. It's one of my favourite amps I own, if not the, nowadays. In terms of the sort of the differences between the JTM45 and the Orange, yeah, I would agree too that I was always in two minds as to which I was preferring. I did, as I said earlier, prefer the Marshall with the humbuckers and the Orange with single coils, but overall I think they both sounded fantastic all around with pretty much everything I threw at it. Those are just two amazing amps, subtly different in the mid-range, but for classic British jangly rock tones, you really can't beat them. You really, really can't. Dennis Flock. You smile a lot more playing the Marshall. You look like you're trying harder with the Orange, less relaxed. And on a similar vein, Jonathan Bott. The Orange seemed to make you smile more. Maybe I'm biased though. I play through a 1979 Orange Super Bass. I really wouldn't read too much into what I look like on camera when I'm playing a certain bit of gear. Yes, sometimes I might smile if I hit a note and it goes into amazing feedback or something, but by the time I'm reaching the end of a filming day in this room, I'm usually absolutely hanging. So if I'm looking a bit lethargic playing one and not the other, it's probably just how I'm feeling after a long day of filming. It's nothing to do with the gear I'm playing. So it just goes to show that people will sort of read into those sorts of things on videos, which is interesting. Yours truly again. I think that is the perfect sounding amp for me. Is your cab open back? And this is the JTM45 clone again. No, it's not, but it can be. It's a Zilla Studio Pro is the cab I'm using with that amp. And I'm running it closed back, but it has a panel you can remove so that it can be open back if you want to. But in that video, it's running closed back. I prefer closed back for most things that would have typically used a 4x12 cab. For something like a Vox AC30 and open back combo, it's a slightly different thing, but for like Marshall and Orange and things, I generally run my cab closed back. Dennis Flock, I got a 68 silver-faced Champ 8-inch speaker. Replaced the original tired and initially not very good speaker with a nice Jensen reissue. However, do you think that with the parallel 4-ohm load, the cabinet would be capable of being driven by the 5-watt Champ? Now, I did reply to Dennis and sort of clarify details. The Champ has a 4-ohm output. So, a 4-ohm output driving a 4-ohm cab or load is absolutely fine. You can do that very safely. That's what it's meant to do. Running a 5-watt Champ into a 2x12, I think by definition you're not going to be pushing those two speakers hard at all within their range of what they can take. So you're just going to be sort of tickling them with a little trickle of power. So it wouldn't necessarily sound as good as just using the single speaker, because most speakers want to be pushed a good amount within what they can handle to sound their best. I think the only speaker I've ever found that sounds amazing whatever you put at it is the Fein A60. Every other speaker, the more you push it, the more the speaker compresses. Sometimes the speaker itself breaks up. It just sounds more alive, and speakers want to be pushed fairly hard within what they can take. So if you're putting 5 watts into 2 speakers, 2.5 watts each at most, you're just going to be sort of dribbling a bit of signal in there. Wouldn't necessarily sound the best, but it could work absolutely fine, and it's very safe to put a 4 ohm signal into a 4 ohm load. That's absolutely fine. But yeah, I'd maybe stick with the one speaker for that. Dake Townsend, great video. It seemed to be a subtle difference to my ears. Maybe it feels different in person. Something in the mid-range sounded a little more direct in the series wiring, but I doubt I could hear it in a blind test. I hope you do a follow-up on testing different speaker impedance values. I'd love to do that follow-up, but that would involve buying lots of different speakers that I already own just for different impedances. So unless a very nice manufacturer is willing to lend me some to shoot that, I probably won't be doing that anytime soon. In terms of how it felt in person, definitely. And I listened back, I shot that video back in March, I think it was, and it only went out recently because I had much longer hair in that video. And listening back to it, in the room was definitely feeling more kind of thump behind me, more kind of low-end moving air with the parallel wiring over the series. But that didn't necessarily come across in the audio. It was more an in-person, in-the-room thing. There was a subtle difference in the mid-range. From memory, the series was a bit more kind of buzzy and aggressive compared to the parallel. But overall, it's not worth worrying about, because I've read so much in forums about how in parallel wiring, both the speakers are going at the same time, and it gives you a huge amount of low end. In series is just rubbish because they kind of cancel each other out because they're moving at slightly different times by definition of it being a series circuit, and it gives nowhere near as much thump. That probably is true, but only like 1%. It's not worth worrying about. If you have an amp that's wired in series, I wouldn't think you have to wire it parallel because it is much better. It really isn't. It was such a subtle difference. Enrico Palazzo. It wouldn't be an end of month Q&A without a comment or two from Enrico, would it? There was some very slight difference, but they were so subtle you have to keep your ears attached to the monitors to hear something. Still, interesting topic. I wonder how it would sound with one of those Magnatone stereo amps. Again, very subtle differences, absolutely. Speaking of amps, Joe, which amp would you like to get next? Maybe a high watt. Which amps are left in your shopping list? Wow, there's so many I would love to have. Not necessarily ones I need, but I'd like to have. I've never really played a high watt amp in terms of the sort of old school high watt. I've played a couple of the reissues in guitar shops, but not one of the sort of old 70s type circuits. So I'm always on the lookout for a really good kind of boutique reissue of high watt types of things. I know Dr. Z makes one. We've got Highlight here in the UK. So there are a few out there. So I'd love to try one of them for sure. To be honest, the amp that's at the absolute top of my hit list is the Dr. Z Z-Master, which is the Joe Walsh signature amp. I don't usually go for signature gear, but I'll make an exception for Joe Walsh because I think he's amazing. It's essentially like a 310 Fender Bandmaster Tweed replica, but with a few tweaks. And I just absolutely love the look of that amp. But unfortunately, they are available in the UK, but they're very expensive. And as far as I can tell, that guitar shop has never sold any, so they're never going to come up secondhand. So unless I'd be happy to kind of take out a finance deal or something to be able to reach the cost of what they cost brand new, I think that's a bit of a pipe dream for me. But that's probably top of my hit list. I am considering it, if I'm honest, trying to find a way of making it work, maybe part exchanging some other amps in for it or something like that, because I really am gassing hard for that amp. But, I generally stick in the British camp in terms of sound, Vox, Fender, Vox, Marshall, Orange, things like that, high watt possibly. But that particular Tweed amp does sound absolutely killer, so that's possibly top of my hit list for now. Krieger. I think YouTube compression probably does away with most of the already subtle difference. There might actually be a 3 dB loss between them, but you would measure that in the room and YouTube will level that change out for the listener. Great comparison and playing. Now, I am thinking of making a video about YouTube compression, because this, I think it used to be much more of an issue than it is now, from my perspective as someone who mixes audio in WAV, with WAV files at 48K and then upload it to YouTube and listen to it back. it never seems to change too much to my ears. And I think that the phrase, YouTube compression, it gets thrown around so much. And I really want to look into that to see how much uploading something to YouTube actually changes the sound. Because in the past, when I've done speaker comparisons, there's one coming up at the end of November, where one speaker is, 3 dB quieter than the other, that still comes across when I'm listening back to it on audio. So I don't think in terms of level compression, it does too much. As long as you're not absolutely slamming it, or the video is super quiet, I think it will adjust to normalise the volume a little bit if it's on the extremes. But as long as it's minus 1 dB and around there, it seems to be pretty good. In terms of bitrate compression and quality, I don't think it's probably as bad as MP3s, but it is something I would like to look into. So I am thinking about making a video comparing the raw audio to something I can kind of rip back off YouTube and compare it in Pro Tools. That could be an interesting one. Enrico Palazzo again. Joe, I've recently read an old interview of Daniel Lanois, producer for U2, Peter Gabriel, Neil Young, and many other big names. And he's famous for using a Vox AC30, but also a Tweed Deluxe. And he says he likes the unusual combination of Tweed Deluxe with a Celestion Alnico Blue. Have you ever tried to put a similar speaker into the Cornell? Yeah, it's got an Alnico Blue in it currently. And it has been in there for a few years. I really like how that speaker sounds in a small, low-powered Tweed circuit. To be honest, I am actually thinking of putting an Alnico Jensen back in my Cornell Romany, because I think the reason I like the blue in that amp is it makes it sound a little bit more British. And as I said earlier, I'm much more of a sort of British amp guy. I love the little Tweed circuit, but having it that little bit closer to a British sound was working for me. But I think, to be honest, I'm actually starting to embrace the American sound a little bit more nowadays. It's starting to be slightly more to my taste than it once was. I'm still a British amp guy, but it's starting to come on my radar a little bit. So I might try putting a Jensen speaker back in there to sort of bring it a little bit more scoopy American. But yeah, I love the Celestion Blue, especially in the little Tweed amp. Sounds great. Enrico Palazzo yet again. The Magma 57 is worth it even without the vibrato. That preamp is amazing. In this comparison, the Magma is the clear winner. Like all Origin pedals, it feels like you're not plugging into a pedal but directly into an amp. I've bought this pedal as soon as it hit the stores because I love Magnatone amps, they are my favourite, and this pedal did what it promised to do in an amazing way. Origin pedals are expensive, but for a clear reason. Their pedals are extremely high quality. Yep, absolutely, that Magma 57 is going on my 2022 pedal board, which I have started thinking about. I know a lot of you wait for that video on New Year's Day. It will be coming. A few changes this year, there's a bit of a spoiler, but yes, the Origin will be on there. All the Origin pedals I've tried, the Revival Drive, the Magma, the Cali 76, they are all just kind of next level pedals, up there with the absolute best ever made. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Origin effects. I think they make fantastic stuff. Michael Craig again, I think. Was he there before? Can't remember. Okay, so what is different in vibrato and tremolo? And so these Revival pedals take the place of amps, right? Can you still use them up to their full potential with regular amps like classic Fenders and Marshalls? Right, so the difference between vibrato and tremolo. Now, this gets a little bit confusing because of Fender, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But essentially, vibrato, when you are playing a note and you add vibrato, that is essentially what a vibrato is doing. It's modulating the pitch. So if you've got a whammy bar on your guitar, you can kind of create a similar effect. That's essentially what vibrato is doing. It's bending the pitch of the note up and down. If you add your dry signal to vibrato, you get chorus. That's how a chorus pedal works. So you could think of a vibrato pedal being a chorus pedal, but without that dry signal for the modulator signal to sort of interplay against. It is just the sort of seasicky pitch bending sound like that. Tremolo is volume, not pitch. So it's like taking the volume control on your guitar and turning it up and down very quickly. So it's kind of dipping the volume over and over again. So that's the difference. Vibrato is pitch, tremolo is volume. And as I said, it gets a little bit confusing with Fender because on the old Fender amps, they had tremolo circuits, but they were labelled as vibrato incorrectly. And people often refer to like a whammy bar on a guitar as a tremolo arm. It's not, that's vibrato. So it's all a little bit convoluted, but that's basically the difference. Tremolo, volume, vibrato, pitch. And the other question was the Revival pedals, like the Revival Drive and the Magma and things, can they take the place of amps? I think primarily they are designed to be kind of standard overdrive pedals to go into the front end of a clean amp and do the amp in a box type thing. I think that's how most people use it, but they do have a switch on there on the EQ1 and the EQ2 for power amp, and that's designed to replace the front end of your amp to go into a power amp directly, into a cab sim, IR, into your DAW software modeling, all that sort of stuff. So they can do both, but I think it's more common to find them going into the front end of a classic Fender or Marshall and doing, you know, just an amp in a box overdrive into a clean platform type amp. That's what they're primarily used for in my experience, but they can do both. Henry Faulkner. I too am left-handed. I play right-handed. I have an advantage in playing as all my fingering is so much easier. We both have much more power and control in our left hand. Go and play a right-handed guitar. You will be amazed. I have played right-handed guitars and I can't play them. My experience is the polar opposite to yours, Henry. I have much more kind of strength and dexterity in my right hand. So I generally use my right hand for anything that requires precision. Writing, throwing a ball, fretting a guitar, all that sort of stuff. My left hand just kind of follows on. So I am very, very opposite to you. My left hand is pretty useless for most things. My right hand is where all the kind of subtlety is. So that's what I use for anything that requires precision. So I have tried playing a right-handed guitar with my left hand. Can't do it. It's a completely alien experience. I originally started off trying to learn right-handed when I first picked a guitar up many, many, many years ago. Absolutely hopeless. Switch the strings around, try playing the same thing left-handed, could do it straight away. So for me, I'm definitely a left-handed guitarist, even though I'm not left-handed in every sense, like I write with my right hand, for example. I just kind of use my right hand for anything that requires precision. So very different experiences there. Celestion UK, the big daddies of the speaker world. Just for everyone's info, the Chinese G12M Greenback is now built in the UK again and has been since 2017. So a few days ago, a video went up of me comparing a Chinese-made standard Greenback to my Heritage reissue, which is made in the UK. And I had heard rumours that Celestion were bringing production of the standard Greenback back to the UK, and it looks like that did indeed happen in 2017. Now, the Greenback I was using in that video was presumably a pre-2017 model because it had a Made in China sticker on it. So that was the standard Chinese-made Greenback, but nowadays, for the last 4 years, they have been made in the UK again. How the standard UK-made Greenback compares to the Chinese, I'm not 100% sure. A few people in the comments were saying the UK-made one is much better, but I can't verify that for myself. Kenny Johnson, the Heritage is louder, warmer and full sounding. The import didn't sound bad though. I think the Heritage is worth the extra coin. And in that video, yes, absolutely. So I had the mics on the speakers in exactly the same place, and I did get a comment, I think it's been deleted, I couldn't find it to put in this video, of someone saying that what I should have done in that video was move the mics around on each speaker to get the best sound. Now, that would definitely create a better sound for both the speakers, but it wouldn't tell you much about the fundamental differences between them, which was the whole point of that video. And I think the best way of doing that is putting identical mics in identical places, moving them so they both kind of sound right, and they get the point across without one sounding horrendous and the other sounding amazing. So kind of creating a middle ground, but making sure the positions are the same on both speakers, and then putting it side by side. Getting rid of as many variables as possible, I think, is the best way of doing a fair comparison. Yes, you could create better sounds by changing the EQ on the amp and using different mics in different places on each speaker. That's what I would do if I was doing a standalone demo of a particular speaker. But doing a direct comparison, I think you need to play them both at the same time, so there's no variances in your playing, mic them with identical mics in identical places to hear the fundamental differences, and use the results of that, even though it's not the best noise, to make a valued and informed decision on which is the right speaker for you in your particular rig and for your preferences. So I think Kenny's comment there was a great summation of what we found in that video. The Heritage Greenback did have a load more low end and it wasn't as fizzy in the upper mid-range, but running both together I think sounded really, really great. So again, there's no sort of correct answer to anything. It all depends on your situation, your personal preferences, your rig, all that sort of stuff. Fern Poll, as an owner of original Greenbacks pre-roller, I can say with hand on heart the Chinese one sounds nothing like an original. The Heritage is quite close. Great, because that's something I couldn't really verify in the video. I would assume the Heritage was closer to the originals, because it's a vintage correct reissue of the originals, but I've never played an original sort of pre-roller greenback, so it's great to have feedback from someone who has. And yeah, I love the Heritage speaker. I think it sounds fantastic. And a couple of more light-hearted comments to finish off this month. Mike, well, this isn't a light-hearted comment. Mark Norman, thanks. By the way, as a retired firefighter, you might consider removing the fabric item from the lava lamp. To be honest, that lava lamp hasn't been turned on in years, ever since I changed the camera angle. It used to look quite cool in the background, but it's over there. You don't see it anymore, but it's off camera, so I'd never turn it on. But yes, there is some sort of fabric thing on there. I would take that off if I were to ever turn it on, don't worry. But thank you for your advice, Mark. And finally, Daniel Doran. I never had much use for vibrato effects myself, but here's a comment for the algorithm. Thank you. It's great to have all your feedback, and as I say, every engagement with a video does help, I think. So I'm tired. I understand nothing about the YouTube algorithm at all, but I think engagement is quite a big thing. So thank you for your comment. I'm sure it probably helped in some way. So there we are, folks. That's the Q&A for October 2021. We've got some big things coming in November, some good demos. I'm going to be comparing the two Heritage, Celestion Heritage G12H speakers, the 55Hz cone and the 75. That's an interesting one. Got some good pedal demos coming up. And yeah, just lots of interesting things. And of course, the big pedal board build will be coming on New Year's Day. I'm planning a bigger feature on tube pedals. So there's a lot of sort of bigger things in the works in the background. And I might even be recording a song before the end of the year as well. So not sure if that will happen yet, but if it does, you guys will be the first to know. So thanks ever so much for watching, folks. I love doing these Q&As, and I know a lot of you watch them and get some out of them. I always get a thumbs down on them, which is funny because somebody watches them every month and doesn't like them, which is fine. I'm sure that probably still counts towards the algorithm in some way. But yes, any questions you've got off the back of this video and anything coming in the next month, drop them in the comment section. I read every comment each month to put these videos together. And yeah, with more comments coming in, I do have to be a little bit more selective, but it's great to have all the chat in the comment sections with you folks. So thank you ever so much for watching, folks. I hope you have a great November, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.